this is the Folksy Friend, and today I'm talking about folk tales. We all know a folk tale, even if we didn't realize it. These are stories that are passed down to us, sometimes from many generations ago. Fairy tales, fables, tall tales, these are all types of folk tales. But myths and legends are not. So, what makes the folk tale? Let's start by defining the term folklore. The American Folklore Society describes folklore as our cultural DNA. Although it's pretty difficult to put an exact definition on what that means, scholars do agree that folklore is about how we express ourselves within our folk groups. And a folk group is any group of people who share a common identity. Your group of friends is a folk group. Your book club, your soccer team, your family. These are all examples of folk groups. So folklore is about a group of people who share an identity expressing themselves. And today we're going to take a look at the storytelling part of that expression. There are a lot of different types of stories. So to determine what exactly a folk tale is, we need to take a look at who tells the story, why they're telling the story, and what generally happens in the story. Folktales are in the oral tradition, so in other words, they are typically said out loud rather than reading them by yourself in a book. The original author of these stories is usually unknown, so if you think of like a fairy tale, you might know who gathered the fairy tale into a book of fairy tales, like Hans Christian Andersen or the Brothers Grimm, but we can't say, oh, they traced this specific fairy tale back to an old German farmer who told the story to his child in the year 1300. We can't do that typically with a folktale. If we think about the contents or the plot of the story, we see that it usually has some sort of moral or lesson that the listener has to learn. These stories are typically also timeless or placeless, which means they can occur really at any time or in any location, but the story will still make sense. If we start a story with a long time ago in a galaxy far away, that doesn't tell me where exactly and when exactly. It's just a general kind of theme to it. Same thing with once upon a time. Well, when is that? Who knows? The story will still make sense, even though we don't know that maybe it happened on the 12th of February in the year of the Manticore. And all of those elements together help us identify what a folktale is. Folktale as a category includes fairy tales, tall tales, and fables. These stories are told as fiction. In other words, we know they're not true, and we expect them to be told as if they're not true. That creates a suspension of disbelief, so we are not confused by fantastical things happening within the story. We're not going to wonder why the animals are talking, or how some lady in a pointy hat turned a prince into a frog. We accept that it is true within the story because the story itself is made up. We listen to these stories for fun, and the speaker will typically tell these stories for fun, or maybe to teach us a lesson or a moral. For example, that might be how good always triumphs over evil, or if you don't listen to your parents, then a monster is going to come get you in the night. So why aren't myths and legends considered folktales? Well, the simple answer is they are their own categories within folk literature. Myths are sacred stories that are told as if they are true, even if we might not believe that they're true. They typically tell us about some historical event, something that happened in the past, or maybe they explain how something was created. They will typically involve gods and goddesses, some sort of magic, but they're told as if these people truly did exist. And at the time a myth was truly believed, it wouldn't be considered a myth, it would be considered part of history. Legends are typically told in the present or in the near past. A legend might also explain how something happened or explain a historical event, but it is not a sacred truth in the way that a myth is. A legend might start with your mom telling you that her coworker's sister's niece did something, or your friend coming to you and saying, hey, did you hear about that guy that blah, blah, blah. It's told as true, and typically we believe it might be true. So although myths and legends do kind of have some overlap with folktales, they are their own distinct categories. To recap, folktales are fictional, and we expect them to be fictional. They contain a moral or maybe a lesson. Their authors are usually unknown, and they are typically shared out loud. Fairy tales, tall tales, and fables are all part of this category, but myths and legends are not. I hope this helped you understand what folktales are and how to identify them. My future Wednesdays will be dedicated to a different folktale each week, going over what that folktale is and kind of digging into it as much as I can. And I hope you will join me for that. Thank you for spending some time with me, and I'll see you next week.